Okay, let's talk about homework 2's multiple choice problems. So first, the question is, what is the consumer surplus in this market before trade? Of course, here you have to pay attention to the problem. It's about the consumer surplus before trade. So basically, we're looking at this triangle, right? And the answer here is A. Second, 4 people decide to meet at a restaurant for dinner, and then they decide to order, and then they decide to share all dishes. And then when they pay the bill, they will split the cost evenly among each of the people at the table. And the question is, when the food is delivered to the table, each person faces incentives similar to which of the following? So when we talk about different kinds of goods, the categorization really depends on 2 factors, right? The first is whether there is rivalry, and the second is whether there is excludability. Rivalry basically means that if I eat this, then you won't be able to eat it, right? Excludability means that whether you can be prevented from eating this dish. And you can see that in this case, because they decide they will share all dishes, so it's not excludable. Second, if one person eats one dish, then this dish will just disappear. All 3 other people won't be able to eat it. So you can see that there is rivalry. And according to what we have learned in the lecture notes, you can see that we're talking about a common resource good. Okay. Third, what is the opportunity cost of 1 unit of cheese in Italy? So here you can see that to make 1 unit of cheese, we need 40 hours. And to make 1 unit of bread, we need 160 hours. Which means if you make 1 unit of cheese, you have to spend 40 hours. And you could use the same time to make 1/4 bread, right? Which means the opportunity cost of 1 unit of cheese is 1/4 bread. Okay, fourth, what would be the consumer surplus? So with free trade, we should look at the world price. And we're looking at this large triangle here. And consumer surplus would be 1/2 times base times height. This should give us 607.5. Okay, fifth, the value and cost of goods provided in an economy are easier to determine when those goods are which of the following. Well, you should choose private goods here, because private goods basically means there is rivalry and there is excludability. So this is a well-defined good, and you can measure its value and cost. But if you think about the public goods, then you can see that it's free. Everybody can get access to it, right? And if you think about common resources, then again, there is rivalry, but there is no excludability. So in this case, you can see that the cost of public goods and common resources, they both are not so easy to measure. Okay, 6, what is not a reason that a lump sum tax imposes a minimal burden on taxpayers? So when we talk about the cost of taxes, there are 2 major components. The first is administrative burden, and the second is deadweight loss. So here, when we talk about administrative burden, then we refer to these three different categories, right? So essentially, it means that the deadweight loss is not a reason that lump sum tax has small administrative burden. Seventh, using all available resources. If a farmer can produce either 65 cantaloupes or 70 watermelons, what is the opportunity cost of one cantaloupe to the farmer? Well, this one is pretty simple, right? What you can see here is if the farmer produces 65 cantaloupes, then he has to give up 70 watermelons. So the opportunity cost of one cantaloupe is 70 divided by 65. Eight, what happens if we internalize a negative externality? We know that when you so we talk about this example in the lecture note, right? So there is a firm which pollutes air, and we know that in this case the market equilibrium outcome will be too large. That is, the firm will produce too much, and the price will be too low. So if we impose, let's say we impose a tax, we use a tax to internalize this negative externality, then what we will see is the price will be higher and the quantity will be lower. So let's look at these choices and see which one fits what we have just discussed. So I guess, yeah, this is B, right? This is exactly what we just talked about. Ninth, according to the Coase theorem, under which conditions can private parties solve the problem of externality? Well, a very important assumption of Coase theorem is no bargaining cost, right? So you can see that here you should choose A here. What will a positive externality cause a market to produce? Again, let's refer to the example we talked about in the lecture note. So basically, we discussed this education example. That is, there is positive externality from education. And the result we got from the lecture note is the market quantity will be too small, right? So in this case, you can see that the answer here should be, let's see which one. C, right? So the market outcome is too small compared to socially desirable level. Okay, 11th, refer to the picture. What is the market equilibrium quantity? So here we're talking about market equilibrium quantity. We're not talking about socially optimal quantity, which means we should look at the private cost supply curve, right? And in this case, you can see that we should choose Q3 here. Okay, 12. Without trade, what would the producer surplus be? Okay, so without trade, then the price would stay at 8. So it's a simple case. The producer surplus would be just this little triangle here. And the area of this triangle would be I don't know, I think it's something like 245. Yeah, it's 245. Okay, let's look at 13. Well, it's a very long problem. So suppose we have a worker in Boland and she can produce either 5 units of wheat or 25 units of fish per year, and a worker in farmland can produce either 25 units of wheat or 5 units of fish per year. And we have 10 workers in each country. And no trade occurs between these two countries. Boland produces and consumes 25 units of wheat, and 125 units of fish per year, and farmland produces and consumes 125 units of wheat and 25 units of fish per year. Now, we assume there is trade now. So both land will trade 100 units of fish to farmland in exchange for 100 units of wheat. Whew. If both land no longer grew any of its own wheat, how many units of fish could it now consume along with the 100 units of imported wheat? Okay, let's see. Wow, it's a pretty long question. Okay, so we have 10 workers, right, in both land. So let's first look at both land. And we have 10 workers. And we assume both land does not grow any wheat. So these 10 workers, they will always produce fish, right? And we know that each worker can produce 25 units of fish in Poland per year. So the total amount of fish this country, Poland, can produce is 250. And then the problem says Poland will trade 100 units of fish away in exchange for 100 units of wheat, right? Now the question is, how many units of fish the Poland can consume? Well, this is pretty easy actually. So we just look at these two numbers, right? So essentially they put the total quantity is 250, and then Poland trades away 100 units of fish. So the leftover, the amount Poland will keep for themselves would be 250 minus 100. So the answer here is 150. So you should choose C here. Okay, 14. Why, okay, dioxin, I guess. Why dioxin emission that results from the production of paper, a good example of negative externality. So this problem is pretty similar to the lecture note problem about pollution, right? And if you look at these different choices, then you can see that we should choose C here, because this is exactly the definition of externality, right? So we discussed in our lecture note, there is externality whenever the transaction between the buyer and seller will affect a bystander, but the welfare of this bystander will not be considered, right? So in this case, you can see that this paper producer will pollute, let's say, air or river, and it will affect other people. However, when the producer calculates its production cost, it will not calculate the cost of pollution. So this is a case of negative externality. Okay, 15. What is the opportunity cost of 1 kilogram of potatoes for the farmer? So for the farmer, you can see that to make 1 kilogram of potatoes, the farmer will need to spend 1 hour. And use the same 1 hour, the farmer can actually produce 1/4 kilogram of meat, right? Because per kilogram of meat costs the farmer 4 hours. So you should choose C here. Okay, 16. Refer to the above figure. What is the increase in total surplus because of the trade? So we discussed this, that is, the increase in surplus is this little triangle, right? So if you calculate it, it's 102 times the base, which would be 90 minus 40, times the height, which would be 8 minus 5. So we would get, times 3. So we would get 75. And it seems the only number we can get is here. So we would choose D here. Okay, next. So what is the opportunity cost of 1 kg of potatoes for the rancher? Okay, it's the similar problem we have just done, right? So here, right? So it's exactly the same, but we're just talking about the rancher now. Okay, so if the rancher produces 1 kilogram of potatoes, so she would spend 4 hours. And with this 4 hours, she could produce 4/3 kilograms of meat, which means the opportunity cost of 1 kilogram of potatoes is 4/3 kilograms of meat. Okay, 18. Which concept suggests that private market can be effective in dealing with externalities? Well, this is just Coe's theorem, right? We discussed in the lecture note, that is, with the assumption of no bargaining cost, private actors, they can actually solve externalities through private market. Okay. 19. Refer to the above figure to internalize the externality in the market. What should the government do? Okay, so this one is exactly what we have learned in the lecture note about education, right? So basically there is positive externality to education. So the social benefit is larger than private benefit. So the social demand curve is on the right of the private demand curve. Then in this case, you can see that to internalize the externality in this market, the government should encourage education. So what the government can do is to provide a subsidy. So here, let me see, it should be B here. Okay, next, 22. Why are so few resources devoted to the creation of knowledge? So if you look at these 4 different choices, then you can see that C is the correct choice. So basically you can see that the creation of knowledge can be considered as a public good. And these firms, they will just want to free ride on the knowledge. Okay, 23. Marcus fixes a tax structure like this. So for the first $10,000, 0%, next $10,000, 10%, then 15%, then 25%, and on all additional income, it should be 50%. In addition, he paid 5% of his income in provincial income taxes and 15.3% on his labor income in federal payroll taxes. And Marcus earns $60,000 in salary and $10,000 non-labor income. What is his average tax rate? So we need to first calculate the total tax paid by Marcus. And we have 3 components here. So the first component is federal tax. So the total income of Marcus is $70,000. And we know that for the first $10,000, he pays 0. And then he pays 1,000. Then it's 1,500. Next, it should be 2,500. And after these amount of taxes, he still needs to pay this 50% on additional income. And this additional income should be $30,000. So here the tax would be $15,000. And then the total federal tax would be $20,000. Let me see. 1 plus 3. Yes, it's $20,000. And now we have provincial taxes. This is an easy tax because it's flat. It's just a 5%. Then the tax here should be this. I think it's 3,500. And then we have payroll tax. It should be the percentage times labor income. And his labor income is just $60,000. So let me pull out my calculator. So we have this. So this should be 9,180. And then the average tax would be adding up all these numbers divided by the total amount of income. So let's see what's our answer. So we get a answer of something like this. And you can see that we should choose B here. Okay, 24. Assume Cliff and Paul were both producing wheat and corn, and both were dividing their time equally between the two. And they decide to specialize in the product for which they have a competitive advantage. What would happen to the production of corn? Okay, so first, you can see that before specialization, both Paul and Cliff will divide their time equally, which means Paul will produce 5 units of corn, and Cliff will produce 1 unit of corn. So it should be 6. And then after specialization. Now just look at this. Who should specialize in what? Well, you can see that Paul should specialize in corn and Cliff should specialize in wheat. So now you can see that the total amount of corn is 10. So the amount would increase by 4 bushels. Okay, 25. What result could private contracts between parties with mutual interests lead to? Well, if you look at this question, then you can guess it's most likely about Coe's theorem, right? So you can see that you should choose C here. They could solve some inefficiencies associated with positive externalities.